Good afternoon, and welcome to Louisiana and welcome to New Orleans. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, but first I'd just like to thank many in the room because last year at this time, if you think about it, we were fighting a tax bill that would have devastated our graduate education. And that tax bill had where it would take graduate waivers and make some taxable income for all of our students. And I appreciate the work that so many of you did when we made calls to get everybody fired up on this issue, and we got it removed from the tax bill. But it shows the power of the folks in this room. And we may only be 20% of Americans' higher education administrators and presidents, but we represent 80% of the students in this nation. So don't underestimate the political power. Don't underestimate the fact that in every region of our states, we are the scale that drives our economy. And we are the scale that our students need. And we do the things that many institutions didn't do many years ago, and we continually do it better. So thank you for all your support on these initiatives. Certainly don't underestimate the political might that's in this room today. At this time, it is a great honor for me and privilege for me to introduce today's speaker to APLU's Council of Presidents Luncheon. I can't imagine anyone else that embodies our theme of resilience and the turning challenges into opportunities more completely than our speaker today. Dr. Walter Isaacson is a New Orleans native and previous editor of Time magazine and chairman CEO of CNN. And we won't talk about his educational pedigree, but it's in Boston and they have $40 billion in the bank. He is chair emeritus of Teach for America, professor of history at Tulane University, and was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve as chairman of the Broadcasting Board of Governors from 2009 to 2012. But perhaps the most important thing for you to know about Walter, especially in your current geographical context, is that in addition to championing education throughout his career, in addition to writing numerous biographies of geniuses of our time, ranging from Da Vinci to Einstein to Steve Jobs, he was instrumental to our recovery from Hurricane Katrina's disaster that struck this area and devastation. To the extent that many don't know that even our medical students loaded up 3,000 medical students on a Norwegian cruise liner and sent it up the river to set it in Baton Rouge so we could continue medical education. These are the types of feats that occurred throughout this area, and Walter Isaacson played a major role in this recovery. From 2005 to 2007, Walter served as vice chair of the Louisiana Recovery Authority, serving as one of the primary architects, drawing up a new plan to get New Orleans and its people, not just on the road to recovery, but back into a thriving hub of culture, commerce, and economics. I hope you're as excited as I am to hear Walter's experiences and thoughts about how we as a public university and we as public university leaders can innovate to turn our challenges into opportunities, and how we can better still serve our communities, serve our states, and serve our regions. At this time, I give you Dr. Walter Isaacson.
Thank you, King. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, King. I was really amazed at all the people from LSU here. I saw all the lanyards. Finally, I saw Jim Ryan. I said, wait, you didn't go to LSU, did you? And there was Jeff Vitter. He said, no, but LSU stole the lanyard franchise. So I really do appreciate being here with you all, and especially because your topic is, as King said, resilience. Resilience is something we learned a lot about in this city. I can remember when the governor first asked me a few weeks after the levees broke to come down and vice chair the Recovery Authority, circling in a helicopter and seeing my own home in the Broadmoor area of New Orleans still under 8 feet of water. And we thought that the city would never come back. And although we all loved New Orleans and lots of us had tears in our eyes, the word resilience was not a word we often used with New Orleans. We kind of used phrases like laissez le bon temps rouler, and the notion that we could arise through toughness and grit and determination was something that we weren't sure would happen. But there's been nothing that has been more satisfying in my life than to see resilience in action and how it happened here. And the way that it happened was largely, if you had to pick a dynamo, it was universities. As King said, whether it was LSU, Tulane, Norman Francis, my other co-chair, who was the president of Xavier, whether it was figuring out barges and ships and Humvees and whatever you needed to do to get people back, the universities were the driving force in the revival of the city, along with the students. I remember 4 years after the storm, when we graduated the class of freshmen at Tulane that were then seniors, but they were freshmen 2 days into their semester when they had to leave and evacuate for a whole semester. The amazing thing is they came back. So did so many other students around this state. They came back, and we had President George H.W. Bush and President Clinton together speaking to them to say that for the rest of their lives, they would have that mark of grit and determination and of resilience, of the type of people who come back to rebuild after a disaster. Also true of Teach for America. It was in this hotel. Canal Street wasn't back yet. Only the Sheraton and the Marriott were open. I think in the ballroom next door, we took the 250 core members who were here for Teach for America and said, the school system is shut. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if it's even going to be back next semester. But you have two choices. We will place you in other places in the country, in Memphis, in the Delta, in Dallas, Houston, where you can teach and you'll get a salary. Or you can stay in New Orleans and try to help rebuild the school system in a new way, and you won't get a salary. We're going to give you a bit of a stipend. We've raised some money, but there's no schools. You'll have no salary. Of the 250 core members, recent college graduates who were in that meeting, 250 stayed in New Orleans. In fact, 100 more came in. And it wasn't just rebuilding a bad school system, it was reimagining a school system where parents had choice, where there was more entrepreneurship, where schools stayed open until 6 p.m. And it was a way to be innovative and creative. One of the great writers to come out of Louisiana was Walker Percy, the novelist, who wrote The Moviegoer, The Last Gentleman. And he had a theory about hurricanes. He said that people actually feel good when a hurricane is about to hit because it lifts you out of your selfishness. It lifts you out of what he called the malaise, out of that feeling that you don't know what you're supposed to be doing in life. And you have for a moment a real purpose, which is to bounce back, to be resilient, to have grit. He had a corollary to that theory, which is after the hurricane is gone and the water recedes and the earth heals, that the everydayness sifts back in, and we lose that feeling that we were all in the same boat, that feeling of a higher purpose and mission. I do think that the second part of his theory turned out to be wrong in cases like this. This new generation, the post-Katrina generation, not just in Louisiana, but elsewhere, they have dedicated themselves to things larger than themselves. And what it does, whether it's a hurricane or any other type of problem that demands resilience, is that it reminds you that it's not just about you. I gave a graduation speech for Chancellor Vitter last year, and I said, everybody in my generation is giving graduation speeches this week, and they're all saying, follow your passion. I want to tell you something to the students. It ain't about your silly little passion. It's about connecting your passion to something larger than yourself. And that's what happens when you get a resilient community and the need to overcome things like that. And it helps, I think, to have a sense of inclusivity that also comes from literally and figuratively knowing you're in the same boat, that you have to have a revival somehow and depend on working with others. It's a key to resilience, this notion of being able to include different people around you, because inclusivity and diversity lead to creativity and to innovation. It leads to new ideas. It leads to people figuring out how you mix and match and make things work and collaborate to come up with things. The very symbol of that is the music that was born about 5 blocks from here in Treme and Congo Square, which was jazz. It happened because 100 and some odd years ago, there was an incredible mix of people, freed slaves coming from the plantation and gens de couleur libre who were already living in this city, Creoles and Creoles of color, Haitians, Spaniards, and French, people coming back from the Spanish-American War, the French opera, the Oriental Foxtrot orchestras, the marching bands, the spirituals from the sanctified churches, and a little kid like Louis Armstrong, who lived in this neighborhood, being able to hawk a cornet that some soldier from the Spanish-American War had left here. All of those diverse influences create a new form of improvisation, a new form of music, a new form of rising together. And to me, that's what you've always had in places that are cradles of creativity. I've written a lot of biographies about creative people, and at a certain point, it struck me that there are certain places that incubate creativity. Florence in 1470, when a runaway Leonardo da Vinci arrives there. It's a very diverse city because Constantinople has just fallen and people coming from the Arab world bringing algebra. It's become a banking center, so there's traders from all over the world. Gutenberg has opened his print shop, but it's not doing well in Germany, so they've all come to Florence, which becomes a center of publishing. And you have architects and engineers and mathematicians working with artists to create things like the dome of the Florence Cathedral and the science of perspective and the art of perspective. Likewise, you see that in Philadelphia 300 years later when Ben Franklin arrives. And in the 1770s, you see people from all over the colonies and all over the world in a city that has Quakers and Anglicans and freed slaves and Jews and Moravians and people who support the proprietors and people who are rebels, all working together. And finally, in Silicon Valley in the 1970s, you see that mix, various tribes coming together. To me, that's what marks real creativity, and we're seeing this around the nation today. In Washington, things are totally dysfunctional. Our politics is a mess. King and I were just talking about how at the local level, people finally figure out how to work things out, but at the national level, we have a poisoned atmosphere. And what you're seeing is various cities in this country become incubators of creativity and rising and becoming what the Rockefeller Institute, what Steve Case, and what you at this conference now call resilient cities. And you can name them. I'd say New Orleans, but certainly Austin, Texas, and Nashville, and Columbus, Ohio, and other places where things hadn't been going well, but you see a creative class rising. One interesting thing that most of these cities that are resilient have, they share something that Florence had, Philadelphia had, and Silicon Valley had when they were cradles of creativity, and that's great universities. As Moynihan once said, if you want to build a great and creative city, just build a great university and wait 100 years. I say to my students when they arrive on campus in the first week, I say, something is happening around you, and if you look around, you will notice it. When you sit at the dining room table tonight, or when you even sit in this class, you're going to realize that you're amid the most diverse group of people you've ever been in your life. People from all different states and many different countries and many socioeconomic backgrounds and races and religions and ethnic groups, all together in that table you're going to sit at tonight. That's the most important lesson you're going to learn at this university, is how to collaborate and how to be inclusive of people who are bringing new ideas and different perspectives. I try to make sure that all of my students do all their projects in a collaborative way, because that is the way all the great inventions of the digital revolution happened. Whether it was the internet or the microchip or the computer, with all due respect to Al Gore, nobody knows who invented them because they were all invented by collaborative teams. When I was in college, they had another word for collaboration. They called it cheating. But what I try to say is learning to be part of a team of people with different perspectives and diverse minds is the surest way to innovation, imagination, creativity, and when plan A doesn't work, towards resilience. The other thing institutions like yours do is it goes back to what a hurricane does. It reminds you that you're part of something larger than yourself. You look at the walls of an institution, and maybe at a certain point you even reflect on what the word institution means. It means that it was there well before you came, and it's going to be there well after you leave. And your time there isn't all about you. It's about being part of something larger and stewarding an institution that passes things on to the next generation. When I asked Steve Jobs near the end of his life, what was the most important thing he invented? I thought he'd say the iPod or the iPad or the original Macintosh or the phone, whatever. And he said, no, each of those inventions was hard, but what was particularly hard, but most important, was being able to invent a team that could continually collaborate with people with different perspectives and come together and every year create new products to form that collaboration. And I said, that's interesting, those products. So that's what it was all about? And he said, well, through my Zen Buddhist training, he said, I learned or came to believe that life is like a river. It's like history is a river. And people before you have put things in that wonderful river. They've put products in that river. They've put ideas in that river. They've put innovations and thoughts and theories and ways to do things. And if you're privileged and if you're lucky, you get to take a lot of things out of that river. You get to benefit from so many of the things people put into that river. But then he said, but now that I've reached this stage, he was very sick, he wasn't going to make it. He said, I realize that it's not about how much you get to take out of the river. What's really meaningful in life is what you get to put into the river. That's what everybody in this room does every day, is you put something back in the river for the future. And he said, I wish I had spent more time doing that. Benjamin Franklin was the person who best embodied, to me, this idea of resilience, creativity, innovation, collaboration, and bringing people together. When he was a runaway and arrived in Philadelphia, one of the first things he started was a club for young tradesmen. It was called the Leather Apron Club because it was for people who opened up the shops early in the morning, put on their leather apron, kept the store, or were the artisans or shopkeepers or business owners of Market Street. He said it's not for the wealthy and for the elite. It's not even just a poor man's or working man's club. It's for we the middling people, the middle class he meant, those who had certain virtues and values that they were going to be the backbone, he thought, of what American values were. And so in that Leather Apron Club, they made a list of the virtues you needed to have. And if you know them, a lot of them deal with resilience. There was industry, there was determination, there was passion, there was frugality and honesty. At one point, Franklin marked, because he was sort of a geek, he checked off each week how well he had done on each of the virtues. He said he had mastered them all, and he shows them around to members of the club that he had gotten them all. And a friend of his in the club says, you know, Franklin, there's a virtue you missed. You might want to try. And Franklin says, what's that? And the friend says, humility. You might want to try that one. And Franklin says, I was never very good at the virtue of humility. I never mastered it. But I was very good at the pretense of humility. I could fake it very well. And this was Franklin's genius. He said, and I learned that the pretense of humility was just as useful as the reality of humility. It made you listen to the person next to them. It made you try to find the common ground. And that was the essence of the middle-class democracy we were trying to forge. So that ability to bring people together, which is what you do each day, and to make them find their common grounds of values and their common pools of knowledge, that was at the core of what Franklin did. The Leather Apron Club every month tried to start a civic improvement project. There was a street sweeping corps, there was a hospital, there was the militia, there was the volunteer fire department. To his deathbed, Franklin has his volunteer fire bucket next to his bed. And of course, most importantly, was the Academy for the Education of Youth in Philadelphia. It's now called the University of Pennsylvania, but back then, it was a very open, very public college. And he wrote the document that described it, and it was in contrast to what Thomas Jefferson did, forgive me, President Ryan, at UVA, which was trying to find the best. He said, what we're going to try to do is try to get everybody involved so that everybody has a chance to move upward. And he contrasted that to the other ways of doing universities. And so that ability to bring people together is something that suffuses his whole career and becomes part of the DNA of this nation, part of the DNA that we've repressed a little bit in recent years, unfortunately. At the Congress, when it creates a Continental Congress, creates a committee to have a declaration explaining why we're having our revolution. It may have been the last time Congress created a good committee, but it's got Jefferson, Franklin, and Adams on it. And you see them working together from their very different perspectives of these three very different men. And in that drafting of the most beautiful, probably most important sentence ever written by human hand, Jefferson begins the draft with, we hold these truths to be sacred. And you'll see Ben Franklin's printer's pen in the first draft, the dark black ink he had, crossing it out and saying self-evident, because he said we're trying to create a new type of nation in which our rights come from the consent of the governed and rationality, not the dogmas of any religion. And the sentence goes on, and they're endowed with certain inalienable rights. And there's Jefferson. There's Adams, John Adams, writing in onto Jefferson's draft by their creator with certain inalienable. So you see our founders doing this balance, doing this collaboration, trying to balance the tough issues of divine providence versus rationality and reason, and creating a nation. And they're doing it in a wonderful way that helps bring us together rather than separate us. I remember that when I was at CNN and we had the first issue of Judge Roy Moore putting the 10 Commandments, people protesting, having a crossfire show about it. And I'm thinking, here we are in the press and here we are as politicians using the 10 Commandments to pull us apart, while I'm trying to write about the founders so elegantly using the balances of putting it together. And likewise at the Constitutional Convention, Franklin is the one who proposes the compromise that have big states, little states, break the whole back of the most contentious issue there. And he said, when we were young tradesmen here in Philadelphia and we had a joint of wood that didn't hold together. You'd take a little from one side and then shave a little from the other side until you had a joint that would hold together for centuries. And so too, we here must each part with some of our demands. And his point was that compromisers may not make great heroes, but they do make great democracies. These are the type of things that we learned when forging this nation. These are the type of things you learn when you have a hurricane. These are the type of things you learn that first week or second week maybe that you arrive at a university, is how to be around different people, be collaborative, innovative, and creative, and work together. During his lifetime, Benjamin Franklin donated to the building fund of each and every church that was built in Philadelphia, and each and every educational institution that was built in Philadelphia. And at one point, they were building the new hall, which is still called the New Hall. It's to the left of Independence Hall, for visiting preachers of the Great Awakening. And in the fundraising document, he said, even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to come here and send someone to preach Islam to us and to teach us about the Prophet Muhammad, we should be open, we should listen, for we might learn something. And on his deathbed, he was the largest individual contributor to the Mikveh Israel Synagogue, first synagogue built in Philadelphia. So when he died, instead of his minister accompanying his casket to the grave, all 35 ministers, preachers, and priests of Philadelphia linked arms with the rabbi of the Jews to march with him to the grave. That was what they were fighting for back then. That's what we do at our great universities in America today, and that's what we're fighting to regain here in the United States these days. Thank you all so very much. Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks. If you want to know more about Ben Franklin or the others, my friend Britton Trice of the Great Garden District Bookstore in Everett, we're doing signed copies out there. But thank you all so much for inviting me. Appreciate it.